All right. So, if you are watching this video at home, then I'm starting a little early because I am under quarantine because of school stuff. So I am going to be streaming this from my house, and they're going to be putting it up on the screen at church. So I have started a little early so we can get that stuff set up. So if you want to jump ahead about 5 minutes, that's when the actual teaching is going to start probably. I'm streaming now. All right, so now I am going to get a link. All right, here we go. Share. I'm watching myself do my thing. This has got a delay, so I don't know how long this is going to be. All right, so I'm posting this link on Facebook so the Facebook people can see it. All right, so I got to figure out how to do this. All right, so I have to, I'm not sure. Here we go, Calvary Bible Baptist Church. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to create a post. Boom. I am streaming from my house this morning on YouTube. Here is the link. All right, I got the message from Jeff that we are up on the screen. Continue. Publish. All right. And then I think I just posted on the church website, the church Facebook. I'm doing my thing. Maybe. I don't know how to check. But I think it's all set. All right. Yeah, okay. That looks good. All right. All right, and then there's my internet. Okay, Jeffrey says we're up. Okay, so questions. So you can either message me. I have both my phones, so you can text me, you can iMessage me, you can Discord me, you can send me a message on Signal if you're like the two people that have my thing on Signal, whatever. You can probably say it to Jeff, and he can type it. If you're watching at home, go ahead and type it. And then, yeah, I'll keep an eye out. I don't have my whiteboards anymore, but I got paper and a Sharpie. So we're going to try to do this thing right. And, yeah, I'll be back next Sunday at service. My quarantine is over Saturday morning. So, okay. I think I got 2 people watching. Can someone who's watching on YouTube tell me if they can hear me? Go ahead and type something, because I'm assuming that my mic is working and that all this is actually going. So here, let me type something. Can you guys hear me? One chat. Awkward silence. I'm assuming that if they couldn't hear me at church, then Jeff would say something, but I'll text. Awesome. Doug said that they can hear me. All right, so I'm good. All right. Yeah. All right, so it's 9:40. I'm going to wait till 9:15 and 20 seconds because I said earlier in the recording, that would be up in 5 minutes, and that was at 9, 10, and 20 seconds. And then we'll go ahead and get going. So, yeah. How's everybody doing? This is giving me bad flashbacks when I was doing it. I thought about straying from my bathroom again, just for old time's sakes, but it's really awkward in there. So I'm shooting for my living room, and my whole family's gone because my wife is down there. Okay, so it is now 9:15. I'm going to wait 20 seconds, and then I'm going to get started, and I will open us in prayer at that point. Okay. I'm going to open us in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for today. Father, again, I thank you for technology, and I thank you for all the wonderful ways that we're able to continue fellowshipping, and that I could do Sunday school. And I just pray you give us wisdom, and Father, pray you give me wisdom and clarity. And I just pray that today would be a blessing in your sight. I pray these things in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, so we are working our way through Genesis chapter 1. And last week we talked about Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And I tried to put that within the context of the culture at the time of the Israelites who are hearing this for the first time, that have come up out of Egypt and were to an unknown degree, but a significant degree, influenced by Egyptian culture, so that they were, in a way, Egyptian. They were worshiping the Egyptian gods. They believed the things the Egyptians believed. They were influenced by all of that. And now they're leaving Egypt and they're going into Canaan. And God is specifically telling them, like, you're not going to worship the Canaanite gods. You're not going to be like the Canaanite people. You're going to be my people. So in the book of Genesis, he is giving them the true history of not just the earth and everything, but of them as a people. And he's correcting what they had believed coming out of Egypt. And he's giving them a proper worldview that will be in contrast to the Canaanite worldview that they are going to be going into. All right. And that is a big part of what Genesis chapter 1 is. All right. So as we start working through the rest of this, what I want to do is try to establish what is going on here in Genesis chapter 1. Specifically, what is it that God is trying to communicate and instruct that generation of Israelites in, to contrast what they believed in Egypt and what the Canaanites are going to be doing. All right, so let's start doing that. And this is, I'm going to be looking at the big picture of chapter 1 and the overall structure and what that structure is communicating. And then we're going to kind of go through and fill in some of the details over the next few weeks of things that I think are important, or would have been really important for that people hearing it. And then after I do all that, I'm going to get into some of the modern science faith issues that I think are less important and wouldn't have even been in the minds of these people at the time. But I do want to talk about it later because we've made kind of a big deal about that on our end of history. Okay, so with that being said, so let's just look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 3. And we're going to start laying in the structure of the book. And I will try to pause regularly for questions to come through, but there's a bit of delay. So I'm saying this and you guys probably aren't hearing it between like 5 and 12 seconds later. So I'm probably going to be a little bit ahead of where you guys are at. And so when you're sending me questions, it's probably going to back up. But again, you can probably, many people there have many ways of communicating with me. So we'll figure it out. And again, and we'll, any questions that come up this week, we can always hit next week as well. Okay. So Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, and God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. And so in this first chunk here, after our introductory statements of Genesis 1 and 2, which establish our introduction, and it sets the stage of the earth being without form and void and darkness and covered with water, we are now going to see a pattern develop in the book. Okay, and so what we're going to see is a statement where there's going to be a let there be. All right. And then there's going to be a statement here about forming. God is going to take an aspect of the unformed earth and he's going to form it. All right. And God is going to also name it. All right. And this is really significant in the ancient world. When you look at all of the creation accounts, the gods naming the aspects of the cosmos are super important. In fact, from the ancient perspective, naming it is more important than its actual material creation, because in naming it, you establish its function. You're creating order in the universe. So again, it was chaos. It's dark. It's without form. And now God starts forming it. And by naming it, he's kind of placing it into its place within the cosmos. And oftentimes, not every time, but often somewhere in this section, there's going to be a statement of that it was good. And the idea is that now you had something that before was in disorder, something that didn't have its place in the cosmos. And now, because of God's creative act, it is now ordered, it is now given its place in the cosmos. And so now that's good. It has function, it has its proper place. We know what this thing is, and we know what it is supposed to do. All right. And then there's going to be this conclusion statement in which there was evening and there was morning. And so in between evening and morning, there's an implied night. We're going to talk about that later. And then there's going to be assigned a day. All right. So in this case, there was evening, there was morning. It was the first day. Okay. Adrian, I acknowledge that you're going to text me with questions. All right. And this is the pattern that we are going to see throughout the first 3 days. All right. So there's going to be a statement of forming, where something that previously was in chaos is going to now be brought into order. God is going to name it. So he's going to establish its function, its place in the cosmos. And then we're going to have this conclusion statement. All right. Where God is going to finish the creative work. All right. And then there's going to be evening, there's going to be morning. And then we're going to look back at this entire chunk and say that was a day. All right. And that's going to separate it from these next sections. Okay. And then not often, not all the time, there's going to be this statement of it was good. So there's a statement of now, something that before was in disorder, where we didn't understand its function, where we didn't understand its place in the universe. We've now gotten closer to that. And we're going to repeat this through the course of days 1, 2, and 3. Now, this repetition is important because, again, when we look at Genesis 1, we've already talked a little bit about how Genesis 1 is really unique with respect to Scripture in that until we get to the 6th day, there's actually no one other than God and the angels, we'll talk about that later, who are actually witnessing this. So at some point, God had to, through prophetic revelation, special revelation, actually communicate this to a human being. Okay, and so within the area of narrative within Scripture, this is really interesting because the only person witnessing the narrative and being able to communicate that narrative is initially God, and then at some point the angels, and then at some point humanity, when humanity is created much later in the account. Okay, and so that's all. It's really interesting. The fact that we see this pattern laying out here for us also is interesting because we are going to see within the structure of Genesis chapter 1, the structure of Hebrew poetry. Specifically, both parallelism and parallelism that shows that things that are similar and things that are contrasted, and repetition. If you'll excuse, my cat is trapped in the basement. I got to go let her out real quick, or she's going to annoy me this entire day. Kirby, come on. All right, come on. All right. So, and she's going to come bother me because I'm the only person here, and so now I am her favorite person. All right. And so the fact that we have this structure for us, like the either through God's revelation or through the inspiration later on, the author of Genesis intentionally structured this book in a particular way, and I believe to communicate particular truths. In the same way, like way back when, it was probably forever ago, I can't remember, when we talked about Genesis, when we talked about Matthew chapter 1, we talked about the genealogies. We've talked about it a couple times since then. Matthew took the genealogy and he built it in a particular way to intro his book about the Messiah. All right. In the same way, the author of Genesis has, I believe, intentionally structured chapter 1 to communicate to us particular truths about life, the universe, and everything, and who we are and our place in it, and all that stuff. We're going to have that awkward moment where the cat steps on the keyboard and messes everything up. And so the fact that we have this repetition, the fact that we have this parallelism, the fact that we have these contrasting themes are going to be really important. So we're going to highlight those as we go through the book. All right. So when these first 3 days, we're going to see this repetition. We're going to see an act of forming, naming on God's part, and then this repetitive structure that indicates to us that the author is doing something really intentional. Okay. All right. And my wife now asks a question. Is there a parallel to something being a new creation, God bringing our chaos to order and naming us his beloved children, etc.? No, I don't think so. I think we see those parallels, like our personal experience of new birth and naming as a children and all that. I think we see those parallels in the life of Christ. And we'll see those a little bit more specific with the creation account of Adam and Eve and the fall and that kind of stuff. I don't think that we're intended to get any of that stuff necessarily from Genesis chapter 1, although as we're heading here, we are supposed to learn a lot about who we are and our place in the universe and our relationship with God from Genesis chapter 1, but it's from the perspective of before the fall. So we'll get to more of that later. Again, I guess I need to be clear. I do not believe that the events of Genesis chapter 1 are metaphorical. I believe that what Genesis chapter 1 is talking about is actual historical events that took place in the history of the universe, the earth, and humanity. Okay? What I'm saying is the author is taking these events, and the way he is communicating them to us is with a particular structure that is to communicate to us particular truths. It's not just a dry historical retelling, but it is particularly, he's taking the true events of the creation of the universe and the earth and people, and he's structuring them in a particular way so that we would understand particular truths. Well, so that the Israelites would understand particular truths that they needed to understand coming out of Egypt and going into Canaan. But then those same truths can be communicated again here to us. So I'm not bringing a metaphorical interpretation or like the whole like there's a spiritual interpretation underneath the actual interpretation. I'm saying in the same way that in the same way that this is a very Jewish thing. In the same way that Matthew took the genealogy of Christ, and from the Jewish perspective, it is an accurate genealogy, but he crafted it in such a way to create the foundation for his gospel that is specifically about Jesus being the Messiah, the son of David, and the fulfillment of the promise made to Abraham. There's something similar going on here in Genesis. Okay, so again, so first paragraph. So before, again, we were dark. Now we have light. Okay, so God, he brings something into this narrative that hasn't been there before. All right, and then he is going to name the light and the darkness, day and night, and he establishes now the function. We now have a way of distinguishing time. Okay, so there's going to be day and there's going to be night. All right. Okay, so the next paragraph starts in verse 6. We're going to see the same pattern. Okay, so, and God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. All right, so we have our forming. Okay, so before, we have the waters covering the whole earth, And now God is saying, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters. And so there's going to be separation between waters. All right. And verse 7, and God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And so we've taken this state of where now we just have the solid earth covered with water. And now he's taken the waters and he's separating it. And now there's going to be waters above and there's going to be waters below. Okay. And he says there's going to be an expanse in between these two things. All right. And then he names it. Verse 8, and God called the expanse heaven. Okay. And there was evening, there was morning, the second day. So again, we have our statement of, so we're in day 2, but we have our statement of forming. And so there's now God is taking this, the chaos, and he's giving it form. And so now he creates something, the expanse. He names the expanse. That expanse is now going to be heaven. And so he puts it in its place. Okay, so heaven is the space in between the waters above and the waters below. There's evening, there's morning, the second day. We don't have, there isn't a good statement here, which I don't think is that big of a deal. It may be just because we don't know all the complete functions of the expanse yet. That's going to come later. But we have the same thing. Okay, and I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about the waters above and the waters below a little bit later when we start going through and highlighting the different aspects of the book. But right now, again, I'm shooting for overall structure. Okay, so that was day 2. All right, so then day 3, this is Genesis chapter 1, verse 9. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. So day 3, again, we're following our pattern. Let there be, act of forming. So now God has already separated the waters above and the waters below, and the heavens in between. So now the waters below, he's going to gather it all together, and now we're going to have dry land. So before, the solid earth was completely covered in the water. We have separated the water, and then now the waters below, he's going to gather into one place and let the dry land appear. And it was so. Verse 10, God called the dry land earth. And the waters that were gathered together, he called seas. All right. And so again, he names. All right. And so the dry land is earth. That Hebrew word for earth is the word from dirt in your backyard all the way up to the entirety of the known world. So it could be the land. It could be, again, but he's establishing that, okay, this is going to be the land. This is going to be the earth. All right, he gives it a particular name, and he says the waters below are going to be the seas. And so he gives it form. All right, and he says, and he saw that it was good. And so we've now gone all the way from Genesis 1-2, where it was dark, there was no form, there was no life, and the earth was covered with water, to now we have light and day and night. We have waters above and waters below, and the expanse in between, which that word for expanse there, it's called heaven. It's the same word for sky, the heavens. And then below the heavens has now been separated into dry land and water. And the dry land is earth, and the water is seas. Okay? And so we've gone from this unformed to now God has formed everything, right? So the water is now no longer this chaotic water, but we have water above, we have water below that's more organized into seas. We now have dry land that is earth. And then in between these things, we have heaven, we have the sky, or sky. All right. And then it's no longer dark. Now we have light and darkness. It's day and night. So we have day, night, heaven, earth, sea. Everything has been formed. And God has assigned it names and function. All right. And this is our first structure. Okay, but now on day 3, God is going to do something that he hasn't done before. And we're going to have this kind of a day 3 part 2 now. All right. Where up until now, each day has had a specific creative act of forming, and it's been emphasized as one completed chunk, and we move on. And day 3, after God saw that it was good, he's going to go through, and now there's going to be another act of creation, but this time, it's going to be something that he hasn't done before. We're going to have an act of filling, and then specifically, we are now going to have life brought into the narrative. All right. And so we have Genesis chapter 1, verse 14. And God, 11. Haven't got there yet. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. All right. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. And so we have a second act on day 3. But this time, God doesn't form, okay, because everything's been formed. Now God starts filling. And the earth that he just created, all right, on that earth, we have seed-bearing vegetation. All right. And we have now life. And we have the characteristics of life, and that now we have something that can reproduce. And so God brings forth a new act of creation and an act of filling, and he brings forth life. And this is going to set the stage for days 4, 5, and 6. Okay, because like we had our common structure, and now we have something new, and it's following that same structure, but it's doing it in a new way. And this is where, again, the contrasting nature of Hebrew poetry starts coming in. Okay, because again, we had creative act day 1, creative act day 2, creative act day 3, and then additional creative act. And now God started doing something new. He started filling, and he brought forth life. And what's interesting is he didn't, in this second creative act, he didn't name anything. All right. And you may be saying, well, Josh, it says it's plants, right? Yes, it is. But remember, back on the earlier part of day 3, when he had the dry land, he specifically named, like he says, we have dry land, but then he gave the dry land a name. Okay. We had the waters gathered underneath. He gave that a name. We had the expanse created, and there's words that are to communicate to us what's going on. We know there's an expanse. We know that there's a separation between light and darkness. We know there's dry land. We know there's seas. Like there are language given to us so that we understand what's going on, but then God specifically names it. Okay, so the light and the darkness, he names it day and night. The expanse, he names it heaven. Okay, the dry land, he names it earth. The waters below that are gathered together, he names it seas. We have vegetation, we have trees, but he doesn't name it. All right. And what's going to be interesting is as we start going through days 4, 5, and 6, all right, we are going to have God now continuing this act of filling the things that he formed, but he is not going to name. And this is going to be important when we get to day 6. We're going to come back around to it. Again, we're going to come back and talk about some of these things as we go, but I'm just trying to establish the structure. What is it that the structure is intended to communicate to us? All right, so day 1, 2, 3. Now, we're going to go to day 4, and on my little chart, I'm going to put it over here, all right, because there's now going to be a parallelism between days 1 and day 4. And we're going to see this develop throughout the rest of it. But we're going to see our common structure, where there's going to be a let there be, but now there's going to be an act of filling. Whereas before God was forming, all right, there's going to be no naming. And I think this is really significant. We're going to talk a little bit about that right now. Okay. And then there's going to be evening, the implied night, morning, and day numeral. Okay. And then various statements of it was good. All right. So let's start looking at the rest of the structure. So day 4 begins for us on verse 14. Okay. And says, and God says, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so. Okay. And so God, here's the let there be. All right. And this is often referred to as the luminaries. Okay. So the sun and the moon, we're going to find out that the stars get made also. All right. And verse 16, and God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give them light on earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning the 4th day. All right. And so now, day 1, we have light, and light is separated into light and darkness, and they're called day and night. All right. And now there's an act of filling that thing that he formed on day 1. And so now it's not just going to be light and dark. It's not going to be day and night, but the day is going to have something in it now, the sun. The night is going to have something in it now, the moon, and there will also be the stars. And their function is given here in the text, okay? That they are there to give light to the earth and to be for signs, seasons, days, and years. They are a calendar. The sun, the moon, and the stars exist so that time can be kept and organized and tracked. And so we know when the seasons begin through equinoxes and solstices. We know when a year has passed. We know when months have passed. Because later on, we're going to find that in order for human society to function properly in its relationship with God, we're going to need to be able to keep track of time. All right. And so these things here are established. All right. Got a question. So when Jesus calms the storm, is he showing that he is Lord over the heavens and the seas? And when he calls himself Lord of the Sabbath, is he showing that he is God? No, I don't think so. I mean, kind of. It's all the stuff we talked about before. Like when Jesus calms the storm, he's showing that he does have authority over the earth. And when he calls himself Lord of the Sabbath, I don't know if he's showing, because he says the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Mankind is the Lord of the Sabbath. Maybe. Yeah. I mean, I guess like maybe on both. I don't know. I again don't think it's necessarily connected to what we're talking about right here. Yeah. We'll get to more of that when we get back around to the gospel again. But I guess it's related to the things I talked about a couple of Sundays ago as introducing Matthew chapters 8, 9, and 10 and talking about like establishing the authority of Christ. Yeah. Now, again, right here, I think this is something that is really easily missed, but it's super important. And it's related to what it is that God is communicating in Genesis chapter 1. God does not, like if you look at this text, the words sun and moon are not in here. Okay. God does not name the greater light the sun, and he does not name the lesser night the moon. And he does not establish a name for the stars or for the constellations or for any of that stuff. Okay. And I think that is super important. Okay. Because it's pointing to the conclusion of this text that we're heading to. Because you got to remember, coming out of Egypt, the most important Egyptian deity was the sun. Okay, not just the god of the sun, but the sun itself. The Egyptian people worshiped the sun as God. It was Ra. It was the Egyptian patriarchal deity that ordered the cosmos and gave birth to all the other deities, or all the other deities take their relationship from him. And it was the physical sun in the sky, and the Egyptians worshipped it. Here, God doesn't even name the sun. And so he puts it within a subordinate function than day, night, heaven, earth, seas. All right. And he clearly establishes that the sun exists as a means to organize time. All right. The sun is not a deity. It's not even significant enough for God to name it. And it is something that eventually we're going to establish is intended for. The sun exists for human beings. Whereas within the Egyptian system, it's completely the other way around. The human beings exist for the sun. The sun is God. The sun is the most important God. And we see here in this account, it's not. The importance of the sun is in its relation to being a tool for human beings and human society. All right. And I think the implication, as we're going to see later, is that humans are going to name the sun. Okay. And so humans are going to establish its function. And humans are going to determine, here's how we're going to use the sun to organize time for functional human society. All right. And so the fact that that God is putting the luminaries in a subordinate aspect in creation, both to those things that he named previously and to what's coming on later. In reality, in the whole scheme of things, we'll talk about it a little bit. God's even putting the sun and the moon in a subordinate position to animal life. Okay. That's coming later. And so this is huge with respect to what it is that the Israelites believed within their Egyptian system, and even going up to Canaanite, because even in Canaan, the sun and the moon are there's deities of those things, and they're representative of something that's greater than humanity. Okay, so important note that we're supposed to see the fact that God is naming all these things over here, and he's not naming things over here as being important. So why isn't God naming the sun and the moon? Because the sun and the moon have a subordinate function in creation. They're subordinate to the day and the night, which God had already created, and they're subordinate to humanity, which is coming later. And that's part of the big picture here of the book. All right. Okay. I don't know if my wife. All right. So, Becky, you sent that same text again. Is there a parallel to being a new creation? No, I don't think so. I think those parallels come in the life of Christ a little bit later as contrast. There is a little bit of it when we get to Genesis chapter 2. I don't think there's parallels to that in here in Genesis chapter 1. A little bit of that is coming later. Okay. Yeah, it actually sent for a third time. Sent for a fourth time. Technology is failing us. Okay, and you're not going to see this for like probably a minute anyway. So I'm sorry, but I don't think it's there. Okay, where am I at? All right, I got some time. Okay, so just sent like a fifth time. All right, let us continue as we move down into day 5. We're going to see this new pattern continuing. Okay, so God's going to fill something that he previously formed. There's not going to be any naming because that's going to come later. And we're going to see how everything progresses. All right, so Genesis chapter 1, verse 20. God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the waters of the sea, and let the birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning the fifth day. All right, so we see our pattern again. All right, and this is now there's a parallelism between day 2 and day 5. All right, and so we're recognizing now that there's something similar happening in the back half that happened in the first half. On day 2, God created sky and the waters below. So we had the waters above and the waters below. There was sky. And so now he's filling the sky and he's filling those waters below. And so the sky is now going to be filled with birds. And the waters below is going to be filled with all the swarming creatures and the great creatures that move in the sea. So the whales and all of that kind of stuff. All right. And so again, the same, God formed everything. And now he's going through in the same order that he formed things. He's filling things. All right. And then we have the language of life. We have a bunch of stuff that's going to reproduce after its kind. So he's connecting it back to the plant life that he created. So in the same way that you got plants, we have seed-bearing plants that will reproduce after their kind. Now we have all these birds and we have all of these sea creatures that are going to reproduce after their kind. But what's interesting is, again, differences are popping up because this time, this life receives a blessing. All right. God blesses the birds and the sea creatures, where he doesn't do that to the plants. Okay. And so there's a similarity between the plants and the birds and the sea creatures. They reproduce after their kind, but there's a difference that he blesses them. This is going to be important. We're going to talk about it later. Okay, but again, whenever we see things that are the same and we see things that are different within a structure of Hebrew poetry, those are things we're supposed to pay attention to. So we're supposed to recognize that there's something similar between the plants and the birds and the sea creatures, but there's also a difference now between the plants and the birds and the sea creatures. And this is going to play out more for us as we keep going. All right, so again, days 1 through 3, we form things, now we're filling them. So we've already filled the day and the night. We have filled the heavens and the sea. So on day 6, our next expectation would be a filling of the earth, paralleling with day 3. Okay? And that is, in fact, what we see. Oh, and again, remember, God didn't name the birds. He didn't name the sea creatures. Why didn't he name those? Because we know, because we're looking ahead, somebody else is going to name those a little bit later. All right. Okay. Day 6, verse 24. And God said, Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. All right. So now we have life. All right. That is filling up the earth, and it reproduces according to its kind. All right. Same as before. So we filled the day and the night. We filled the heavens and the sea. Now we're filling the earth. But again, if day 6 is paralleling day 3, then we would expect a day 6 part 2. Okay. In which we are going to have, again, something new. All right. We're going to have an aspect of creation that didn't exist before. And this indeed takes place in this next paragraph. Okay. And while we are going to have a special act of filling, and this is going to, how am I going to word this? We're going to have okay, yeah, we'll talk about it more in just a minute. But we're going to have an act of filling, but we're going to have an act of filling that hasn't happened yet. before. That's going to be very significant, which we'll probably end up talking about next week. But we're going to have now mankind. All right. And verse 26. Then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heaven, over the livestock and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. All right. And so now God's going to make man, but he's going to make man different than anything he's made before. He's going to make man in his image, and man's going to have a different function. All right. Man's going to have dominion. Okay. So verse 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the seas, over the birds of the heavens, over every living thing that moves on the earth. Okay? And God said, behold, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit, you shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and every bird of the heaven, to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. All right. And so we have now something new. We have man, with male and female, created in God's image. And so up until this point, everything that God's created, he's created in a particular way, and he's named it, he's given it functions, and he's filling it up. But now he says, okay, now I'm going to create something, and the thing that I'm going to create is in my image. And he says to man, okay, look, you're going to fill the earth, you're going to take dominion, you're going to subdue it. And you're going to go and you need to subdue and have dominion over everything that I've created, all this life that I've created. And I'm also giving you, and that life that I've created, dominion over plant life. Like I'm taking you and I'm putting you at the top of this created order. All right. All right. A pause for a question. Why did God make birds and fish on a different day from people and animals? Is that why we have a better relationship with the furry creatures? We're going to talk about it a little bit. I actually would say we can have a similar relationship with the furry creatures, with birds, and not just fish, but the sea creatures. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I think ultimately, again, like I'm leading towards this question of why did God make it this way? Why did God do 7 days? I think part of it is so that we would have this structure in Genesis. And then there's a second factor that we'll talk about a little bit later. But it fits God formed the sky and the sea and then the earth. And so then he filled the sky and the sea and then the earth. Okay. Yeah. So we'll talk about it a little bit. And then I got the Jesus calming the storm question again. I don't know if these are accidents, but again, like I talked about it earlier. Yeah, it's just go back to when I talked about Matthew chapter 8. I would say there's probably a yes and a no on both halves of those questions. But I don't think that's what's going on here in Genesis chapter 1. Okay. And here's where we start getting to the point. All right. Because again, when we look in the Egyptian system of the world and we look at the Canaanite system of the world, mankind is at the bottom of the totem pole. Underneath the sun and the moon, underneath the animals, especially with the Egyptian system, where, again, like they worship the sun, they worship the moon, they worship the earth, they worship the Nile, they worship the sky. These things were deities. And then all the other deities had sacred animal heads. And so you had the frog-headed deity, the cow-headed deity, the scarab-headed deity. And those deities, because those deities existed that way, those animals are sacred animals. You know, it's similar to like in India within the Hindu system where cows are more significant than people because cows are a holy animal. They're a higher form of reincarnation. This is typical of the ancient systems of belief. We'll see it in the Greco-Roman system where animals were the ones that got all the good gifts from the gods and humanity got left out. This is flipping the entire created order as it was understood. And so God is putting humanity on top over all the animals, over all the plants, and even over the sun and the moon. And that man is the penultimate aspect of creation. And this is further manifested in, again, the structure, because we know that there's a seventh day. Okay. And then at the sixth day, God said it was very good. So it's good in a way that it wasn't good before. And that now we have the structure and the function of creation is now all in place. Everything's been formed. Everything's been filled. Man is now here in its place doing what it is that it's supposed to be doing. Yeah, I know. It's okay. Your phone's broken. All our phones are broken. And then that's leading us to the seventh day, which is actually chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, which are part of the account of Genesis 1. It's a bad chapter break. So this shows up at the end, where we have, thus the heavens and the earth were finished and all the host of them. So he's saying it's all been formed, it's all been filled. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done and rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day, made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. And so we have the seventh day structure that is built. And we've already seen a lot of these lessons that are coming through that are specifically addressing the Egyptian beliefs that they came out of Egypt with and the Canaanite beliefs that they're going into. But there's more going on here, okay? And so I will introduce this concept and I will review it next week. But the fact that we have the seventh day creation, that the seventh day is holy, and that the creation, the actual acts of creation culminated on day 6 in human beings is, I think that structure is super important, okay? And I believe, again, for a couple of reasons. One, we got 7. We know that throughout Scripture, 7 is a holy number. It's associated with God. It's associated with God's perfection, God's completion, all that kind of stuff. All right. And so it is supporting the perfection and the completion of God's created work. Everything's been formed. Everything's been filled. Everything's been established as what its role is in creation. All right. And mankind is put in that. Okay. And I think there's something else that's going on here, and it has to do with the concept that we're going to see much later in Scripture with regards to the temple. Okay. We see in Scripture an association between the number 7 and the system of worship that gets established within the nation of Israel at the same time frame that the book of Genesis is being introduced. Okay? And there's several references that we can look at when we talk about this. So I'm going to give you these references to check them out. And here, I'll hold them up here for a while, and I'll talk about them. And then I'll probably intro this idea again and give a chance for people to ask questions next week. All right? But first of all, with this, the idea of the tabernacle, when Moses was setting up the tabernacle in Exodus chapter 40, verses 19 through 32, in the physical structure and elements of worship of the tabernacle, there's 7 different aspects of it. And they're put together in these 7 stages. Whereas, the ark is put in, and then the lampstand and the showbread table and the altar of incense, and then the altar outside and the basin and all that. There's 7 key physical structures that represent the worship of God within the tabernacle. In Leviticus chapter 8, verses 33 through 35, the consecration of a priest was a 7-day ceremony. Okay. Later on, when we get to the events surrounding Solomon's temple in 1 Kings, we find out that it took 7 years for the temple to be completed. It was completed over 7 years. Chapter 6, verse 38. In chapters 8, 2, and 65, it was consecrated over a 7-day period in the 7th month of the year. And in chapter 8, during Solomon's prayer of dedication, when he got to the petitions, there's 7 petitions. And so we see this association with the number 7 and the tabernacle and the temple and the priesthood. We also see this within the ancient cultures at the time. There was again, with the Canaanites and the Mesopotamians and all them at this very time, temple ceremonies. Temples were consecrated over the course of 7 days. And then even within the Canaanite creation myth, so the culture these Israelites are going into, Baal, the patron Canaanite deity, constructed his cosmic temple in 7 days. All right, so the number 7 is associated with temple worship. All right, and I think what God is doing is and this is something some scholars have keyed into this, and they would even say that like Genesis chapter 1 is God building his cosmic temple, and I think they're taking this concept a little too far, but I think there's a truth in there that we're supposed to see. Because remember, this stuff right here, when the Israelites are experiencing this, it's the same time they're getting Genesis. Okay, so they see the 7 elements of the tabernacle. They have the 7-day consecration of the priesthood, and they see the 7-day creation and the 7th day being holy, and something significant about that in the book of Genesis, that God is indicating that he is ordering the cosmos and he's going to dwell in it. And the cultural understanding of that 7th day is that God formed everything, filled anything, and then on the 7th day at rest, he's now taking residence. And it's saying that God, even though he existed before creation, that he was the one that created the chaos that he then formed and filled, it's his intent to occupy creation. And that mankind is going to occupy a very unique place within that creation. Okay? And again, I think this is related to this idea that we're supposed to understand this temple metaphor in here, where God is going to be dwelling in creation. We're supposed to see this number 7, because within those pagan systems of building and sacrament of like the pagan temples, so after the physical structure of the temple was created, and before the temple was consecrated, the thing that would take place in between those two things is the graven image, the idol, would be brought into the temple, established in the temple, and then we would go through this consecration celebration. All right? Why do I think that that's important? Okay, so back there on day 6, during that second special act of creation, I said there was going to be a special type of filling that hadn't happened before. Okay, so God says, after we have everything formed and everything filled in the same order that he formed it, he says, okay, we're going to now create man in our image. That word there for image, the English word image, is not the most common translation of that Hebrew word. Okay, you want to know what the most common, this is where I would say, does anyone know what the most common translation is? But I'd have to wait like a minute for anybody even knows I asked that question. If you do a word study on it, and I'm pretty sure I'm correct, I've checked it a couple times, but check it again and check me out. If I'm wrong, I'll fix it. Elsewhere in the Old Testament, that is the word that is translated idol or graven image. Okay? When God says that I'm going to make man in my image, he's saying I'm going to make something in creation that represents me the same way that those Egyptian deities, these Canaanite divinities, are going to have something representing them. Okay? But the dead gods of Egypt and the dead gods of Canaan have dumb, mute, dead idols made by human hands. God has an image that is living and that he made to represent him on earth and to live in fellowship and communion with him. Mankind is the idol of God. And so again, he creates the universe, he forms it, and then he fills it, and then before consecrating it, he brings in his image that represents him. And when he does this, again, the pagan deities have these dumb, blind images that can't do anything. They just sit there. God's image is going to participate and parallel God's work of creation. Okay, because remember, he said he fills it and he forms it. But then when he creates all this animal life, all right, there's a way in which the chaos that he formed and filled there's something that still needs to be ordered, because he fills everything with life, and then he says to man, okay, now you got to go and you got to subdue it, you got to take dominion. Okay, he does not create plant life, fish life, bird life, and animal life subdued and under the dominion of man. He's saying, okay, now you guys, in the same way that I brought order to creation, there's an element of creation that you are not going to bring order to. And this is reflected because we're going to go to Genesis 2, and we know how this is going to work. What's one of the first things that Adam's going to do? He's going to name the animals. Okay? Why didn't God name the animals? Because Adam's going to name the animals. It's symbolic of Adam subduing and bringing that aspect of creation under his dominion. And so God's image parallels and participates the created work of God. He's saying, I formed, I filled. Now you guys are going to go out. In the same way I established function, now you guys are going to go out and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to bring order to creation in a smaller way, but in a comparative way to how I brought order to creation. And I brought function to creation by naming it. You are going to bring function to creation by naming it. Okay? And he tells man, you got to go out, you're going to do this work. I'm placing plant life under your dominion. Okay? You got to go out and subdue, you got to take control of animal life. I am giving you plant life. Okay? And you are going to be my image in the universe that I dwell in. And that now that I've brought in my image to my cosmic temple, again, I'm not saying this is a metaphor that actually happened, but this is a piece of it. And now that he has brought in his image, he's consecrating it as holy. And so this structure is here for us to understand the role that humanity takes place in creation. We are God's image. We are his representation that is supposed to be in fellowship with him, participation with him, and parallel his act of ordering and exercising of authority over the earth. We are not at the bottom of creation. We are at the top of creation. We are God's image. And we are his stewards and representation in the earth, in his act of ordering it and exercising dominion and control and exercising and continuing and facilitating the proper functioning of the earth. And we are that image within God's holy ordered creation. All right. And not only is Genesis structured for us to understand our place within that creation, it's also structured to understand how we're to function in it and how we're to maintain that function of creation. Okay, and so that's the stuff that we will talk about next week, because we know that the structure of this is also to establish for us the work week. And I'm quoting that because I think work week is a terrible way of talking about it. But it's to establish not only our place in the structure of creation, but our role in the function of creation. And so that's what we're going to talk about next week. So we're going to talk about Sabbath. We're going to talk about all that kind of stuff. And then I want to go through and we're going to look at some more details in chapter 1. Like we're going to talk about waters above, waters below. We're going to talk about what is the difference between these three different types of life that we've seen. What is the significance of that? We're going to look at a few of those roles. And then and we're going to start incorporating in the other creation accounts of the Old Testament to help us navigate those aspects of the book of Genesis. So we're going to look at Job 38. We're going to look at Psalm 104. We're going to look at Genesis chapter 2. And then we'll bring in Proverbs chapter 8 a little bit, because Proverbs chapter 8, it's there, but it doesn't give us a whole lot of new information. It just kind of helps bring the bridges between that other stuff. Okay. Okay, I got a text, but it's nothing related to anything we're talking about right now. All right, so I'm going to wait like 30 seconds to see if I got another question that I can quickly talk about before next week, and then I'm going to close this in prayer, and then I'm going to kill this stream so that everybody can take over at the church with the stream there. Thank you guys so much for participating with us. I hope it worked out. I'm so looking forward to being back with you guys next week. And again, anything we talked about this week, any questions, we'll just talk about it next week. All right. So here's my final whiteboard. So screenshot that, write it all down. And then here are the texts about This is some of the Old Testament significance of the number 7 related to the temple. We'll talk more about that later. And guys, look, I mean, you are the living image of the Holy God in creation. And you are called to represent him and to participate in him and to parallel his role in creation here on earth. I'm going to close this in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for today, Father. And thank you, for setting the record straight with these Israelites so that we would understand that, we're not just some animal. We're not just some feature of the universe, but we are something holy and unique and special because of who you are and because of who you made us to be, and that you have a desire to have a relationship with us and to partner with us and to participate with us, and that we would parallel your work in creation, Father. And as we learn more about this as we go, Father, we just pray that we would find our value and our purpose in you. And pray these things in Christ's name. Amen. All right. Appreciate you guys. Love you guys. I'm going to kill this stream. I will be back with you next week. If you have any questions, throw them in the comments or shoot me a message and we will figure it all out. All right. Goodbye.